Oh, hey, hello, wow, here is some news. San Francisco District Attorney Chesa Boudin has been booted in a recent recall election, with nearly 60% of voters in favor of ousting the progressive DA. That is quite a statement against the recent left-leaning policies concerning crime, but also the result of a $7 million campaign against Boudin, $650,000 of which was paid for by Republican billionaire William Oberndorf, as well as $500,000 from the California Association of Realtors. In fact, the high roller list is basically a bunch of very rich people, hotels, and property owners. Oh, also, coincidentally, the neighborhoods most in favor of the recall also happen to be the wealthiest neighborhoods. That is odd. I thought this was a grassroots effort led by sensible Democrats.
The safety of San Francisco is dependent upon Chesa being recalled as soon as possible.
I didn't support the Newsom recall, but this is different.
Chesa takes a very radical perspective and approach to criminal justice reform, which is having a negative impact on communities of color.
That's an ad from the Safer SF Without Boudin, featuring interviews of concerned citizens, members of their own staff, who apparently make a monthly salary of $16,000? Hey, who is funding this Democrat group anyway? Oh, it turns out it's that William Oberndorf guy again. Wait, but isn't he a Republican? I don't understand how that could be. It's a conundrum. So yeah, it sure seems like in this case, the GOP using fear of crime to make rich liberal yuppies vote against progressives absolutely worked. Good work, you ghouls. Boudin is now being temporarily replaced by Brooke Jenkins, who, wouldn't you know it, is the other person we showed you in that video. What a strange coincidence. Now, depending on the articles you read, Jenkins is either a progressive criminal prosecutor who quit under Boudin because of poor management, or a corrupt opportunist who helped a girl lie on the stand in order to win a case. Honestly, I don't know. I feel like people who live in this area probably have their finger better on the pulse. I also don't know what kind of bastard Boudin was, and personally, I think all politicians and law enforcement officials are bad, and we should just live in yurts and all day unprotected. But what I'm getting at here is that despite an overall reduction in crime since the 80s, San Francisco, like the rest of the world, was hit with a pandemic. And that pandemic did create a slight rise in some crime, as well as hate crimes, specifically against Asian Americans, apparently half of which were carried out by a single guy. That sucks and is bad, and criminologists attribute this to a variety of factors. But instead of working to repair the situation, this rise was instead leveraged by a lot of politicians to attack their opposition, specifically to attack progressive leaders for being soft on crime, despite the fact that this problem had nothing to do with who is in charge on a local level. Much like blaming Biden for gas prices that are up around the world, blaming local progressives for crime is the most baseline disingenuous political maneuvering, something a child should be able to see through. And yet in this case, it actually worked. People blamed Boudin for everything from homelessness to mental illness issues, despite the DA having no control over those things. Then a bunch of people, funded by conservative billionaires, used this to leverage themselves into power. And again, I don't know if Brooke Jenkins is any good. She could be great or terrible. Actually, it's probably the latter, considering that she said she wants to use prosecutorial discretion when it comes to charging kids as adults. So I think she's terrible. And despite her promises, she probably won't do any better of a job as Boudin in fixing the recent crime bump. And I would argue that's because the problems people are talking about here, rising gun violence, homelessness, mental health, etc., that isn't something a DA can solve. That's a systemic failure that needs to be addressed with policies and not simply trying to get someone who is tougher on crime or whatever. But again, they don't actually care about solving the issue so much as leveraging it. And if it makes you feel any better, San Francisco is the only place that this happened, in that so far, a lot of other progressive DAs in California have held onto their positions during primary challenges. So you could argue that what happened to Boudin was a highly coordinated ousting and not part of a larger trend. You know, at least until other ghouls pick up on how successful it was. Or heck, maybe we can look at this as a cautionary tale. But probably not. It seems like it's just so hard for people to not be afraid, especially right now. And we generally operate on this principle of, well, better safe than sorry for a reason. Because it is better to be safe than sorry. Generally speaking, that's true. That's why using fear to leverage power is so effective. Like when you threaten that bad things will happen unless people do what you want, most people will do that thing, especially if it's not too hard to do. And I feel like we had a name for that. Like war on that concept at one point. What was that name? We were supposed to avoid negotiating with it. Close, but not that. Stop! Terrorism. Seems like using fear of crime to leverage power is a terrorism. So I guess what I'm getting at is that I'm not for crime. I don't want crime. I think we should build a society where less crime happens, depending on the crime, because crimes are defined and decided by people, but that should be the goal. And from what I can tell by looking at history and statistics and consulting the Oracle, is that the way we try to prevent crime right now isn't so great. Our prison and justice system suck. We have done videos about it. And so ramping up those same tactics isn't going to help. And trying to scare people into having more cops and worse punishments really isn't going to help. What would help is to perhaps explore methods of rehabilitation and alleviate the conditions in which crime increases through yurts and unprotected. Hey, thanks for watching that clip. Here's the evergreen end plate to ask you to like and subscribe. It's any day of the year where you are.